Do I smell a hungry man dinner?
Nah, that was just a hungry man.
Welcome back to the Key Takeaways channel. I'm Em. If this is your first time here, welcome in and take a seat and grab some tea. And if you're not new here, shout out to y'all for joining the group chat and subscribing and supporting this channel. And don't forget to like the video. So today we're actually going to talk about an oldie but a goodie, at least in my eyes, the Steve Harvey Show. So for today's makeup, I decided to do a bit of 90s glam. I actually really like this look. I might start doing it when I can't think of a theme whenever I cover shows or movies or whatever. But yeah, bit of 90s glam, simpler times, at least we believe so as millennials. The last video we talked about why all her fall exhibited the toxic side of protection when it comes to our wonderful patriarchal structure. So this is actually part of a series I'll be doing on this channel called Millennial Review, where I'll review some shows from basically my childhood and talk about what the show was, what things might still make the show relevant today, / why it's now become sort of like my comfort show, and if the show would hold up to our refined standards of today. Spoiler alert, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but the beauty of watching these comfort shows is sometimes the nostalgia factor and being able to, in a way, go back in time for a little bit while still being aware that some of the jokes in this case clearly wouldn't fly today, which is fine. When we know better, we do better sometimes. So let's talk about what the Steve Harvey Show actually was. It was a 90s sitcom. It ran from 1996 to 2002. It was about semi-retired funk legend Steve Hightower, who lived in Chicago and needed a job and got one as a music teacher at the local high school, thanks to his friend and roommate Cedric Robinson, who's the coach and gym/health teacher there. And Steve actually promotes and becomes the vice principal at that same school in like season 4. Also working at the school is Principal Regina Greer, Steve's old classmate from school, definitely high school, and I think before then as well. Now Steve reuniting with Regina kind of results in not a full-on enemies to lovers trope, but it's in that realm, since Steve used to actually make fun of Regina because she was overweight in high school, but she since lost that weight and is now conventionally attractive.
Perhaps you prefer the Bride of Rerun.
Piggy Greer? I sweat Crisco Piggy Greer? Girl, you done cleaned up since high school.
But of course, Regina gives him hell for being so trifling. So that's sort of where that tension of the somewhat enemies to lovers trope comes in. By season 2, we're introduced to Lovita Alize Jenkins, who's hired on as Regina's administrative assistant, not secretary, get it right.
Huh. When did it hit you, Doc? Was it right after the fly-eating teacher, or how about that chair-throwing secretary?
Administrative assistant.
And pretty quickly becomes Cedric's girlfriend, and eventually they wind up getting married. A lot of the supporting cast who tend to move the narrative along throughout the series are the students, mainly Romeo and Stanley, aka Bullethead, as well as Sophia and Sarah in the initial seasons, and later Aisha, Coretta, and Lydia. So most of the guest or recurring cast are either Steve's group, the High Tops, his dates, his, Cedric's, Regina or Lovita's relatives, or Regina's boyfriends. But of course, when the series finally wraps up at the end of season 6, the main students, at this time Romeo, Bullethead, and Lydia, graduate. Cedric and Lovita are married and wind up having their first kid, and Steve and Regina finally get together, and I believe Steve moves with Regina to California when she got a new job offer.
Is the cable out? Cedric, did you pay the bill? Of course I paid the bill. Did you put money in your checking account? Oh.
So one thing the Steve Harvey Show did that some other 90s sitcoms laughably did not do, looking at you friends, was inject a lot of realism into their comedy. We already know that teachers, even to this day, don't make a lot, and looking at the average teacher salary in Chicago in the mid-90s, it makes sense that Steve and Cedric were roommates and that Lovita lived with her mom until she and Cedric got engaged. But At the same time, it also made sense that Regina was able to at least afford her own apartment by herself because principals made that much more comparatively. And it made sense with a lot of their shows centering more community events or just hanging out at either Steve or Regina's apartment, or even a school event, or just what happened throughout that week at the school. Obviously, there were some shows that had a little suspend your own disbelief moments, like when Seth and Levita got mistaken for this royal African couple while on their honeymoon. But for the most part, the sitcom really deals with the realities of being lower middle class and having to take care of the students in a public school with public school funding. And I think at a time where things have been looking grim with the state of our economy and the cost of living continuing to rise, it has been a bit of a nice reality check to go back and watch this show in particular, because it sort of puts things into perspective of just how much of a difference your community can make. And it might just be easier in some parts of the country more than others. I will say in my case, I live in a more southern, sort of rural part of Anytown, USA. So I would say it would probably be easier to recreate that simplistic but communal feeling that we saw on the Steve Harvey Show if, for example, I were near in a city like the Chicago area. But yeah, that sort of simplicity and communal aesthetic is nice to revisit sometimes when watching the show, especially knowing that these people were basically in their mid-30s. So it's that feeling of seeing people slightly, in my case, older than me, still trying to figure things out and not always have it just magically happen because of TV magic. All right, so let's go to what I'll call some quick production notes. So the Steve Harvey Show series ended in 2002. Cedric the Entertainer actually had a joke in his, I think, 2006 stand-up about how no one knew it was the last day until it was the last day.
I know that's how they did us on the Steve Harvey Show. I didn't know it was the last day till I walked in and saw the cake. I'm like, hey, Steve, what the cake for? He said, this the last day, player.
According to our friend and these days sometimes more reputable source, Wikipedia, Steve Harvey actually wanted to start pursuing other projects by the end of season 5, but production convinced him to stay on for one more season. So obviously, like a lot of y'all, I've seen the Cat Williams and Shannon Sharp interview, and that sparked this debate/controversy on whether or not the Steve Harvey Show basically ripped off of Hanging with Mr. Cooper, starring Mark Curry.
Steve that went to go watch Mark Curry do his whole sitcom and then stole everything Mark Curry had. Now Steve got a sitcom where he the principal and he wear a suit and then he gets this high top fade, making all black men think he got the best lineup in the business, and it's a man unit.
I will be honest, I have not watched Hanging with Mr. Cooper yet. I do know it came out earlier and had 5 seasons. It ended in 1997, so it could be the case that, yeah, the Steve Harvey Show was inspired by Hanging Mr. Cooper, where the plot was also this guy in his probably early to mid 30s being a teacher, and I could see some plots translating over to the Steve Harvey Show, but that's all I feel comfortable opining on at this point, at least until I either watch the series for myself or a nice documentary just spills all the tea within the next few years. But despite it only lasting 6 seasons, the Steve Harvey Show did wind up syndicated, and you can find it to this day on Hulu, Netflix, for now, and Tubi, so it's still pretty accessible overall.
Want me to spell it out in front of everyone?
Please do.
That has just blossomed into an undeniable attraction between a man and a woman. Dang, boss lady, why don't you just gift wrap the panties?
So since the Steve Harvey Show was a sitcom, let's talk about whether or not the comedy held up over time. And I will say comparatively, honestly, yeah. Like, obviously we know the whole thing of Regina going from like this fat nerd to glow up principal is steeped in fat phobia, which we as a society are still addressing. But as far as the other jokes and metaphors, they're still pretty funny. Like, there are some shows where if you decide to rewatch it, you'll cringe a lot and just go ahead and try to make peace with the fact that it was a show of its time, but you don't really have to do that, at least in my opinion, with the Steve Harvey Show. Now, there are jokes on Levita specifically that we could argue is more steeped in respectability politics when it comes to Black culture.
Hey, Regina, look, I got your memo here about the teachers meeting, and per your instructions, I will sit in my seat and try not to act all ignorant.
Well, excuse me for being like 7-Eleven coffee. Too strong and too black.
But considering that Levita dished out just as much and was pretty strong in the comebacks, Terry J. Von Riley's She Got Married execution of Levita was so good and pointed that it sort of neutralized it to where she wasn't really seen as like this punching bag for respectability jokes. So if I had any critiques, this will be my main one. The women and men can't truly be friends underpinning of it all. It's more subtle in this show and doesn't 100% outright say it, so it doesn't really get in the way of enjoying the show. But you can tell it's there, especially with how Steve and Regina's relationship evolved, and the romantic angle of it was fine. But here's where I'll pull the show of its time card. A lot of sitcoms / shows around this time sort of had the same underpinning, so I'm not necessarily gonna blame Steve Harvey or the writers, even though Steve Harvey at this point has doled out this prescriptive advice even in today's time on his radio show. If you can't tell, I don't really agree with that thinking. I think there is room to have friends who are not the same sex or gender, and it can be very valuable, but that's just me. Overall final thoughts. I think it's a good comfort show. For some reason, personally, I get the urge to watch it as the weather gets colder. Maybe because, again, I'm in a more southern part of Anytown, USA, and it snows a lot in Chicago, and they had a lot of snowy shows, so it kind of helps me retreat to this cozy vibe. But overall, I know it's something I can put on and enjoy, and I'll be able to watch with my eventual potential hypothetical kids one day. But yeah, let me know what you thought about the Steve Harvey Show, if you watched it, and if you sometimes like to revisit it as well. If you've never watched it, like I said, I gave away the plot, sorry. It's on Netflix for now, Hulu, and Tubi. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching, and be sure to like this video if you like this video. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you can see more videos like this one and join the group chat. Be sure to follow me on my socials, Empowered Muse on Instagram, Threads, and BlueSky, and M's Musings on Substack, where I write weekly blogs that sort of correlate to what I talk about here. If there's anything that you want me to cover, be sure to put it in the comments as well, and I will see you all next time. Bye.